Welcome to What the Hex, your source for Warhammer Underworlds and under 30 Health 2 fighters dreaming of revenge. I'm your co-host, Davy, and with me, I have my well-tempered co-host, Phil. How are you, Phil?
Hey, I'm doing all right.
Good to hear. We are coming to you on January the 25th, and we are going to be covering the two releases going on pre-order. If you are listening to this episode on the day of release, that would be the Rivals deck Edge of the Knife, and of course, Borgitz Beastgrabbaz, the already previewed Grotz hunting band that have a pet troll.
Yeah, I think.
So we'll be covering those things. Before we get to that, though, we're going to do our usual things. We actually have a ton of community shout-outs today, so we're going to kind of get to that, cover that, and then we'll get into the main topic. A big one is Worlds. Not the World Championships of Warhammer, but the World Team Championships. And Tristan has been working hard to make this event bigger and better. And he's given me some things to mention. I've been kind of keeping my eye on it. I don't think it's going to work out for any of us here, but here's the details that you should know about this. It's the 5th and 6th of July. It's being held in Vienna, Austria. A team consists of 5 players, and you have an optional coach slot if you want. So far, there are 7 different national teams that are confirmed to be attending, including for the first time Team USA. And Mark Baconborn is heading that up. So we're really bringing the heat. We have 3 more teams that are in waiting. And actually, check that. I guess they've got 8 nations confirmed: Austria, USA, Czech Republic, Poland, Spain, Italy, Netherlands, and Great Britain. Denmark and Germany are working on more team members, and 4 of those already registered nations will have a second team. They're limiting it to 20 teams, and also really big news is that they are going to provide a golden ticket for each of the entire winning team.
Wow.
Which is pretty amazing. What I love that for 2 reasons. One is it's just straight up cool, but the second is that like it's going to draw a little more attention to a team event. It means that kind of GW gave the nod because they have to. We know a little bit about the process from hosting our own. You know, it is a process to apply. So somebody somewhere had to be like, "Yep, that's cool. We want to highlight that. We'd like to promote that as an event." And I know that has cascading effects. You know, as one of the people who helped stream Underworlds, it would be an opportunity to be like, okay, well, these guys earned their ticket at the at the team championship and get to talk a little bit about that. So super cool.
Yeah. Well, and we don't have a lot of other sort of events that are specifically international. Worlds is probably really the only other one. So
yeah,
it's probably a good opportunity for GW. Like, even though they're not officially running this, that it like adds more attention to the game and puts it on a world stage. So
yeah,
it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
If only Austria was not an expensive trip.
Yeah, I already have, by the time this is kind of coming out, as when it's getting locked down, usually my summer schedule is pretty entrenched. So yeah, it would be cool to do some year. The dream would be like get Emma trained up and we would both go and be team members. That'd be kind of amazing. But
what the heck's team?
Yeah. But I suspect, especially if this gets off the ground and starts running well, is that it's going to be tougher and tougher to actually get a slot on the team.
That
might
fair.
Eventually be a selection process and all that sort of thing. So, but that's not the only events happening. There's tons, but we obviously want to highlight our own. We have our March 1st Madtown Throwdown. That's going to be for folks hoping to prep for Adepticon. So a few weeks before, good time to kind of stress test any builds you were thinking. June 21st will be our Worlds qualifier. We'll have a golden ticket available there. It's going to be our hope to be able to stream our top table at least at that, if not at others. And then what we're really excited for is September 13th, we're going to have our team event. That'll be a 3-person team, sort of modeled off the, Alliance format? That existed in first edition. We talked a bunch about that last episode where we kind of did our year in review, year look ahead. So if you want to hear more, you can do that. We'll cover it. We'll continue to mention it and come back around to it.
Yeah. And these all have BCP events already. So if you want to actually register for any of those and come and join us, you can do so right now. So go ahead.
Yep. Links will be available in our Discord, but also in the show notes here.
Yeah. Awesome.
The last thing I would say about that is it's looking like September 13th is going to be part of the Mortal Realms Con, which is a nascent event. The entry, we usually do about, I think for these events, we've been doing $20 for the event. And in that one specifically, $20 would get you access to the entire Mortal Realms Con. They're working on a pretty cool venue for that.
Yeah.
So if you want to even expand out further from just Underworlds, there'll be opportunities to play other games as well with other agencies from our network.
Absolutely. Should be some fun stuff similar to the stuff that we run at Adepticon. So if you are familiar with that, or if you are planning on coming to Adepticon, you can sort of scope it out there and see if you'd want to come and join us again.
Yeah, totally. Phil, you got anything else for us?
I do. I actually had to narrow down to just a few things here because people have been cranking out the content recently, and in no small part due to the Las Vegas Open having just happened.
Yeah.
So over on the Spent Glory blog, we have basically a rundown of the Las Vegas Grand Clash. Obviously with Fish Mode's perspective, having played in the Clash, but, gives just an overview of everything that was going on, the different players and warbands, and good read if you're interested in the first sort of big event since Worlds, I guess, at least in the US, for Underworld's second edition. So some cool stuff there. I don't, for folks who don't know, I don't want to spoil anything, but you'll probably be surprised as to who won or which warband won the Clash. So that should be a fun one if you're not familiar with that event already.
So 13 unique warbands attended LVO. The winner may surprise you.
Yeah, right. Let's get some clickbait in there. And then another one that I thought was pretty interesting is over on the Staggerers blog. This was a deck analysis of Countdown to Cataclysm, specifically with the focus on why is it showing up so much is sort of the second pairing for people.
Yeah.
And at least on their deck deposit sort of spot on their blog, almost half of the decks that they have up there have Countdown to Cataclysm included. So been being used a lot. I've certainly been using it a lot. I think every person I've played at League has been using it too. I started putting it in too. I'm guilty of overlooking a number of things, including several warbands, a little bit of Dread Pageant action lately that has been pretty fun, and definitely Countdown to Cataclysm. If you look back at my commentary on its release, I'm like, I don't think it's worth the payoff. I don't know. Yeah. So anyway, I won't give a blow by blow of the article, but they give some good reasons for what they think are the sort of driving forces behind why people are taking it. And I tend to agree. So I think it's a good read. Sort of breaks down, even if it is a focus on specifically that one deck, I think it actually gives a pretty good idea of what makes a deck good in second edition as well. So,
right.
So it's pretty fun. And then the last one, this is actually a article that's focused more at new players. This is over on the Goonhammer website. Friend of the show writing this here, and they putting out a new sort of beginner series on how to deck build for the Nemesis format. So the assumption being you have started playing Underworlds, you have sort of learned the game playing Rivals, and now you are sort of perhaps a little intimidated with the idea of deck building. And point of the article is to sort of break down as to why it shouldn't be intimidating. It can be a fun part of the game, and what the sort of the benefits are, and sort of the how to. So if you are new to deck building, give that one a look.
Yeah, perfect. I really like having a resource like that because I am hoping to recruit some of the. I don't know that I'll get them to like be league attendees, but got this annual game cabin coming up, and my role is always to bring. Almost always it's a GW, but some sort of miniatures game
Yeah.
that they can play kind of the skirmish level. So I've done like Aeronautic Imperialis, I've done Blitz Bowl, I've done Gaslands,
Mm.
stuff like that. And a while ago, I did first edition Underworlds. It was not a great showing because it was, I think the very first season I set up a 4-player. I've talked about this a number of times. Set up a 4-player game. It looked awesome. Like 4 of those boards all together looked really cool.
Yeah.
But the game was not really built for that. So
No, not so much.
no, it was not great. But this time I'm bringing 2 boards, so it's going to be I'll kind of help facilitate 2 simultaneous learning games, and then just set them up with rivals decks. And if any of them get like kind of catch the bug, then I'd like to be able to point them to the deck building resource exactly like that. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool.
yeah. As always, any of the community resources, community shout outs that we are discussing here, they are going to be in the show notes. If for some reason you're having trouble access, I don't think that's a thing. I've never had somebody say they can't access them, but you can also hit us up in the Discord. I should have said actually, if that any of that talk about worlds interests you, then Tris_Siren is the person to find on the most of the Underworlds Discords, but you can also just kind of fly into ours and we'll help get you pointed in the right direction.
Absolutely.
And they have their own Discord set up for that event, which you can also get an invite to if you are just World Team Championship curious and want to get a little more into it. But that is it. There was a lot of community stuff, so I think we're gonna jump into these new releases. It's kind of exciting to talk about. Phil, would you prefer to talk about the Beastgrabbaz first or the Edge of the Knife first?
Let's talk about the deck first.
Okay.
Because that way we can then talk about if the deck makes sense to go with the warband.
That sounds good. So that is Edge of the Knife. It is advertised on Warhammer Community as Flex. Phil, you got the preview copy. Do you know, was it on the back? Did it show that it was Flex? This is one of these things where they define these archetypes, but it's actually hard to find if you're not.
I believe it does have the symbol on the box, but I actually handed off the box to Skylar, so
Okay.
I don't have it right in front
right.
of me, but I do believe that it does. Yes.
Okay. This deck technically has a plot card.
It sure does.
Want to run that down for us? All the ins and outs.
Yeah. And funny enough, this is sort of a thing that the community article that sort of teased the deck got wrong. So for all you folks who are patiently waiting or perhaps worrying, they did in fact word it correctly in the deck. So while using this Rivals deck, fighters with a health characteristic of 2 or less and or 2 or more damage tokens are tempered.
Yeah, and that says, it says because it's not friendly, so you can this will apply to enemy fighters as well.
Yeah,
pretty easy to understand. I think it's worth taking a second right now to talk about which warbands seem to be covered by that, right?
This is going to be one, though, where my memory perhaps fails me a little because I remember health stats from first edition.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
and they've changed a little bit. So I did do a little bit of looking. There are a lot of the death warbands that have just straight 2 wounds. So I believe Sepulchral Guard, Canaan's Reapers, Thorns of the Briar Queen are all like everybody except the leader basically is 2 health.
Grimwatch, same boat.
Grimwatch, yep.
They're bigger ghouls, and the bats all dropped to 2 health, but became resurrectable. So they love this.
Yeah. Not a ton. I mean, I guess Gits.
Gits are in a so-so place. I think they have all 3 of the archers. Their netter, both their squigs. So
I mean,
6 is there? Yeah, that's a decent
it's
spread.
a decent number. Like, they don't have resurrection.
Yeah.
They still have a number who are not automatically qualifying, but like they have a few that are, well, more than a few. 6 is more than most warbands. So uh, that sort of works. Order, I don't think really has any.
Yeah, the closest they come is Hexbane, which has 4
Yeah,
fighters
with
that
the
start on 2 health.
dogs, but
Yeah, so
uh, so you could maybe make that work. But anyway, I think Death though really are looking at this pretty well. I guess the Spike Claws swarm,
yeah,
all 3
don't hate it.
minions,
Yeah,
and they can all be resurrected, so that's
yeah.
always a plus. I think that's probably about the ones that would care though, right?
That's about what I'm tracking. There may be something here or there that we're overlooking, but I think that's I for a second I was like, oh, this is gonna be great for Molag. Oh, did you know that all those squigs are 3 health now? What?
No,
Yeah,
I did not. That
yeah.
is quite interesting.
Yeah. So uh, when as we go through this, we'll kind of get a sense for how helpful it is to be tempered, how helpful it is to have that built in. Otherwise, you're going to have to like generate it. So I think the other way to go at this is to have like a warband that may involve some self damage or have high health pools that can take those hits and still be alive and so be tempered. I think that the not great in between is like the 3 health situation where you take a couple of damage. Is
Yeah.
like you is a very small window between being tempered and being dead.
Yep. I would definitely agree. That's sort of the absolute worst spot to be. Even 4 is like tricky. But if you're
Yeah,
5 or more, like you're still feeling okay, I
yeah,
guess.
yeah.
With
I,
2.
it's funny because I think of the name of this deck and I'm like, actually, Edge of the Knife is kind of a pretty appropriate. Like if you're thinking like, oh god, I've
Yeah,
taken
right? Like
2 damage,
I'm
or
right
I'm one,
there.
yeah, I'm one swing away from dying is kind of where it
Yeah.
goes. So, yeah, so we're gonna do our usual where we highlight a couple of the we each highlight 1 or 2 objectives or how many we find, and these are as for folks who haven't heard us do one of these in a while, we're highlighting the ones that we find the most interesting to think about, not necessarily the ones that we think are the strongest. And it
Yeah,
might even mean that we're picking one that is we think is not good, but we're hoping to be proven wrong. As I
for
mentioned
sure.
earlier, one of my favorite things is to be wrong about stuff, wrong about Countdown to Cataclysm, wrong about Dread Pageant. That sort of thing is kind of fun because it means that there was more to discover.
Absolutely.
If you wanted to lead us off with, I like to do. You can pick a surge or an end phase, but I like to at least get one of each from each of us. Is there an objective that you want to highlight?
Yeah, there's one in particular that I just really can't decide if like it's good or bad, but I do
Yeah.
think it's interesting, and it is called Calm Before the Storm.
Mm.
This one stood out to me
Oh yeah.
because it's one of the 2 Lorien phases.
Yeah.
And you score this in an end phase. If there are any damaged fighters,
Hmm.
note that that's any, not just friendly, not just enemy, any,
Yeah.
and those fighters are not adjacent.
Hmm.
So this is a weird one because like it's it's not saying hey nobody can be adjacent, which is good because like that's always tricky, but it wouldn't be hard to imagine a scenario where somebody's like, oh, I'll just take this damaged fighter and sidestep them, and now I've blocked you out because I have
Yeah.
one damaged fighter who I managed to get adjacent, and that was the only one.
Yeah.
um I I'd like to think that this is like in most games something people won't be thinking about, and you'll just sort of score it.
Hmm.
Um, by the same token, I think we've sort of already discussed that like there's a lot of ways you could accidentally get this blocked.
Yeah.
um, and that makes it feel a little less interesting, but it's certainly not anything we've seen design wise before. So I do like that.
Yeah. What? So I thought I really like that you brought this one up. I think I might have forgotten that I thought this one was so interesting because I got distracted by other things. But another aspect of this one is that I think a lot of the warbands that are excited about this deck are those ones that have fighters that start as tempered, and those are fighters that are a little less likely to have damage. They're either fully healthy or dead. Like they
Right. Yep.
not all the time, and especially if you're someone like Thorns with like 2 defense dice, and then you have some shots at standing fast against 2 health attacks, so you could generate it there. I think it's exactly like you said. It can be stopped if somebody's thinking about it, but sometimes this kind of card just pressures your opponent. Like until you see this, until you see Alone in the Dark, until you see Stay Close, all objectives that score based on specific positioning of fighters across the board, you're giving your opponent another thing to think about. Like, oh gosh, I want to be on that treasure token, and I want to make this attack, and I don't want to have this guy in a dangerous spot, but also I got to like think about who's next to who and all that sort of thing. So I think what I like about these is that they have impacts beyond just the fact that it's a 2 glory end phase, which is pretty nice. So
yeah, absolutely. How about you? Which
I'm
one?
gonna go. Yeah, I'm gonna go with a surge here first, and this is just kind of a power choice. I think immovable is pretty great. Score immediately after an opponent's action step if a friendly fighter was the target of an attack in that action step while they were tempered and the target was not slain. That's real good, I think. And that's real good for a number of builds. But obviously, like I think Thorns starting on 2 defense dice love this. Like you try to kill one of the little guys and you miss, they score.
Yeah. It's fun that it's flexible that way too, because like if you put it on a big fighter like Mollog, who happens to be in the art, it's one of those situations where just given the way that 2nd edition works, like there will be at least 1, probably 2 attacks that like would force this to be triggered, because you hit him once, you get the damage on him, he's tempered, you're gonna need to hit him again.
Yeah.
And,
right. Great point.
So like at that point you're like, oh man, I want to like blitz him down, but I know they're probably going to score movable.
Yeah.
And there's just not a lot you can do about it. So it's like kind of good from both sides of the, spectrum here, where it's like you could be using the big fighters that are hard to take down and you can make sure it triggers. You could play with those small guys, and at some point somebody's going to miss one of your small guys, I would hope.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think you'll have a few rounds where this is frustrating, where your opponent lands all their attacks.
As always.
Yeah. I think, Paven, for example, is running with Sirenized Razors, and I had kind of overlooked just how accurate they were. And so I was like, I'm like, God, he's hit every attack. And I was like, well, he's rolling like 3 or 4 dice on every attack, and he often has cleave, and like that actually makes sense. I've been staggered for some of it, so I think that is maybe a kind of a nightmare scenario matchup for you, where they're doing exactly 2 damage and they're being very accurate. But I agree. I think if you're reaching for this deck, this is one of the first objectives that you will probably include, unless you have the wet paper baggiest of warbands.
Yeah, I mean, even then though, you're just gonna assume that, like,
it's just gonna happen.
Probably somebody will miss at some point.
Yeah. What about you? How about another?
Yeah, well, I'll go for a surge this time, and I think this one, I'd like to think that this has some play, but also it feels like it's maybe a bridge too far, but it's an interesting design choice. This is called Sneak into Position. You score this immediately after an opponent's action step if 2 or more tempered friendly fighters are adjacent to the same enemy fighter.
Yeah.
So this has some weird timing stuff that makes it hard. So to get 2 tempered fighters adjacent to the same enemy, either they had to charge into a crowd, which most people are not super interested in doing, especially now that scything is gone. Or you had to find a way to move 2 fighters, hopefully at the same time, because if you do them one at a time, your opponent's probably not just going to let that happen unless they've like already charged or something.
Yeah.
But positional scoring, I think, is always interesting. Some of the other cards that exist for positional scoring that I have trouble with are things that are like, oh, have a fighter in each territory. In
Yeah.
theory, I like that as a concept, but it's saying you have to have at least 3 fighters alive to do this.
Right.
And they all have to be in very specific spots on the board. So it's like you're asking a lot.
Yeah.
Whereas this at least is 2 fighters. And as long as there's an enemy fighter, you can kind of set it up. How do you feel about the after an opponent's action step of this?
Not a huge fan. I think that it's makes it more counterable, and it's harder to, like, something like countercharge can help get you in position for this.
Yeah.
But I think this needs a fair amount of effort. I think the ideal situation is that they've charged somebody's been aggro, they've charged into your territory, and then you have some ability. Either they've missed their first target, or you have something like Scurry with Gits, where you can come back at them, and then they've got to decide, like, all right, now do I dig out one of these guys from around my fighter in case that my opponent has sneak into position? I mean, kind of the same thing I was talking about of like, do I try to counterplay this possible positional score that edge of the knife player is going to pop off with, or is that too much effort that is messing with my own plan? So
Right.
This wasn't my favorite, but it did catch my eye.
Yeah. I don't love it, but I think that it's interesting design space. So
yeah. There are a couple like real solid ones. Like Aggressive Defender is a reprint that we've seen before. I think in Emberstone Sentinels.
Very, very good.
Just super, especially if you have ranged fighters behind enemy lines. It's probably already playing in your game plan. You're just trying to hold a feature, or you just be on a feature in enemy territory with a tempered fighter. Great. But I think I'm due for an end phase, and I think I'm going to bring up what looks to be the payoff. This is Trial of the Tempered.
Oh boy.
Which is a really cool picture, actually, because it's got the three of the horrors from Ephelim's Pandemonium. Just the kind of color palette and the framing is pretty awesome on this. But it says score in an end phase of each fighter is tempered. Boom, done. It's 3 glory for that. And I think this feels like a meta pick. I think if you are seeing, I'm trying to think, like we saw at Worlds, I am going to forget the name. There's the 3 glory payoff if everybody has a charge token. And Daniele took that, and it was pivotal because he knew that he was going to be facing a lot of Gore Chosen and other people trying to use Reckless Fury.
Right.
That's a card that you wouldn't want to take if you were facing Gits or something, because you're not going to score it unless it's super late in the game. This, I think, is like, hey, if I think I'm going to see other tempered warbands, or if I think I'm going to see, I think this is okay into Elite, where you maybe have killed one and splash damage onto the other 2. Like this is a doable payoff. I think at first glance, I was like, no, that is too hard. Because I think if there's like 4 and 5 fighter warbands that are going to have a lot of not tempered fighters, this feels like a really big reach. But I would keep my eye on. I think a clever player in the right meta will include this and get some mileage out of it.
Yeah, it's a weird one for sure. I was in the same boat when I first read this card. I was like, there is no way I'm ever touching this. I still am probably a little hesitant, but I do think it's worth trying to see if there's a way to like play around it. I do think there's like some weird builds where you, like, if you know that you have inbuilt pings in your war scroll, and then you also have the ability to bring some ping cards, that makes it a lot easier to handle any scenario, because you can like make sure that you set up like, oh, that one fighter that I couldn't quite get to, well, let's ping them and just set this up. It's not a lot of warbands heal, so if you can just put the 1 damage on them, it's probably not coming off. The one thing that would make me definitely just put this one away and never look at it again is if we really see the resurrecting warbands become meta, if there's a lot of them out there.
depending on their
Oh, but a lot of them are
resurrecting.
2 wounds.
A lot of them are
So
two anyway, and a lot of them, like the pictured here, Pandemonium, these guys come back and they're
oh
wounded
yeah,
all the
and
way
they
down
yeah they
to
have
vulnerable.
taken damage already.
So
Okay,
even
so maybe not.
Spawnma, who doesn't start tempered, if Spawnma's been resurrected or raised, then Spawnma
Yeah,
will
yeah,
be
he'll
tempered
be
once
tempered
back
as
out.
well. I guess I didn't even think about that. So never mind. Ignore me. Is it
No, I mean it's
I'm sure people have been or well, not
ignoring us. Yeah.
probably,
Yeah.
but I would think other people would be in the same mindset. But you're right, because like a lot of the times if they're being resurrected, they are already tempered.
Mhm.
Even if they're a larger fighter being resurrected, because they try to balance that, right? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, if you're bringing back this 4 wound fighter, let's make sure they're not going to actually have
Yeah.
4 health, which I
Yeah.
need to get better about saying health.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for 3, I wouldn't have been like, if this said 4, I wouldn't have probably questioned it too much.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, it's one of those where it's like, is it enough? Because like,
Right.
you look at something like Annihilation, right?
Hmm.
Very, very hard, but 5, like, it
Yeah.
is quite the payoff. But the problem is, like, you're already winning if you did it. But it is sort of the question always is like, are they asking you to do a lot, and is the payoff worth it? And I think
Yeah.
3 is probably enough.
Yeah. And for folks who haven't looked at this deck yet, I should point out that there are ways to make your own fighters tempered in,
Yes.
or even other fighters tempered, at least temporarily. There's some permanent for your own fighters, so
Yeah.
that can be overcome. Well, let's talk about possibly some of those. I think next up, and I'm getting better about calling these ploys. They were ploys originally, and then they became gambits
Yeah.
once spells existed, and then they became ploys again.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
what in the ploys caught your eye?
Well, honestly, there's a lot.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of really interesting things in here.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll start with one that maybe is a little outside of like what the rest of the deck is trying to do, but is a card that I actually just really like as a design space. And it's
Mm-hmm.
called Spiteful Traps. You pick
Mm.
an enemy fighter with a health characteristic of 3 or more within 2 hexes of your leader, and you can give that fighter a move token.
Yeah.
Like, we used to have some cards in first edition that were things like give an enemy fighter a charge token, and it was before the charged out rule existed, and it always felt really horrible.
Yeah.
This isn't quite that punishing, but it is somewhat similar in that, like, if you throw a move token on a fighter before they can charge, at the very least, you are saying to your opponent, you cannot get charged out unless you're
Exactly.
playing Reckless Fury and you have ways
Yeah.
of handing out charge tokens. So
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. It also stops them from charging, which is pretty great. The only caveat, and perhaps a good one, is that you do have to have your leader pretty close to him. So
Yeah. But not. Yeah. So yeah, within 2 hexes, that's true. Yeah, pretty close. So, I think when I think about what the ideal use case in this is that you're somewhere in the second or third round, your leader is still alive. Often the leaders in these warbands that we're talking about are fairly important.
Yep.
And you're like, man, I really want to make a play with, one of my minions or one of my small guys or something like that, or even your boss. But I'm deciding between like retreating my boss, who is in a real dangerous spot because of a particular fighter, or making this play, which maybe works towards my game plan. This kind of lets you make that play that you want to play, and then say, hey, the fighter that's close to my boss has actually got a move token and will not be able to charge.
Yeah. Yeah, on face value, not always super obvious like how it's going to play out, but I know there've been so many times in games where it's like, I'm down to one fighter, I know I need to get a lot of work out of him, and then somebody plays a card like this and you're just like, oh no. I am now very much locked out of this game if they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I kind of like having some more control elements, and then like, and not super super hard control. Like you can
Hmm.
still do stuff with a move token. It's just
Sure.
no charges, which
Sure. Yeah.
sometimes is all you need. Well, how about
Uh,
you?
yeah. I will. Glance over the. I was tempted to say sidestep, but that's just almost a meme with us, But you'd love to see
Yeah,
it. You love
reprinted
to have another
again.
source of
This
sidestep.
is what, the
Yeah,
fifth time?
this might be the fourth.
Fourth?
I
Okay.
think. In our review, I kind of looked through that. It is. Oh no, I think Great Fortitude might be the most reprinted power card. I'm
Well,
not sure.
also a good one.
Yeah, but Power from Death is one I am highlighting, and I really like. This is a fair amount of text for like a second edition card. This is a surge ploy. Plays immediately after a friendly fighter with a bounty of one or more is slain by an enemy fighter. If that fighter was tempered before inflicting the damage that would slay them, draw up to 3 power cards. So there's several things in here.
Yep.
You can't get it for somebody who's naturally 0 bounty, like the Venomites.
Yep.
You can't get it for somebody who's been raised, which I think are all good caveats. And it must be slain by an enemy fighter. So specifically can't be pinged to death, but even more so can't be pinged to death by your own stuff.
Yeah.
Because I think there have probably been builds in there where, I'm going to make an attack with the, what is it? Desperate Rage. There's the one,
yep, from Cataclysm.
Yep. So you can't like self trigger this. The enemy has to do it. However, drawing 3 power cards, this is a nice get back. Like, okay, I'm gonna. If you have this in your opening hand, you're feeling great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Feeling a lot better about that front line of very killable fighters. So,
good. And as we sort of mentioned before, this is one of those types of things similar to some of these objectives where, like, if your opponent, and not if your opponent knows that you're playing this deck.
Yeah.
And if they look at your warband and are like, oh man, like all but the leader is tempered right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Can they really afford to let you draw 3 power cards? They'll have to ask themselves that question a lot, because it'll be like, well, am I now okay to go get the kill? Because if I do, they're potentially drawing 3 power cards, and like just have to be thinking about that all the time. I mean, it's very strong, but I think it's also one that's like just a fun card to have for the head games.
Yeah, totally. Do you have another one you want to highlight, or are you ready to move on?
I think we can highlight. I mean, there's a lot in here that I would highlight. I don't know that we want to highlight them all, but I do think there's some interesting stuff.
Sure. I
think, just to point it out, because you had mentioned there are a couple of these that can make your own fighters tempered. There's, I think it's 3 or just 2?
There's at least 2 ploys and an upgrade.
Yeah, so I see 2 ploys. So I will just quickly say there's one that makes all friendly fighters tempered just for the next action step. That's not bad, but like probably less of what you need. The other one is called Running Riot, which I think this is just an interesting card. In that I don't think we've seen this exact wording before. It says, this is also a reaction ploy. It says, play this immediately after a tempered friendly fighter's successful attack. Pick another friendly fighter. That fighter is tempered. Period. Which is a weird thing, because it's like usually on a ploy it would be like this persists until name time that it lasts, but this just says they're tempered. So as far as I can tell, this means you turn that fighter tempered and they just stay tempered forever.
That's my understanding.
Which, in those warbands where only your leader is the fighter who is not automatically tempered by their health characteristic, that this is certainly a way to just make your whole warband tempered and not have to think about it again.
Yeah. That's pretty solid, if especially if you are working towards that payoff.
Yep.
So
yeah, if you need it, you have it.
Yeah. For me, I think again, there's several that are really attractive to talk about. I think most interesting for me was this synchronized effort. Pick two tempered friendly fighters within 4 hexes of each other, remove them from the battlefield, and place them in the hex the other was removed from. Uh, I think
Yeah.
the tricks you can do with that seem pretty great. It can be as simple as I was trying to be on this particular treasure token, my fighter got driven off, or the fighter I have up close is already charged. Now I can't, like, the best guy I have to reach that can't do it, whether you're trying to get to a treasure or feature or make an attack.
Yeah.
I can see teleporting Gristle well around the board with this to really extend that big attack. I think there's a lot of cool tricks with this. This is in that realm of illusory fighter or hidden paths, which I always feel like big brain plays when they go off well.
Very much so. I do like that it's restricted to 2 tempered fighters, so you
Yep.
can't just be like, oh, I'll play this in Gore Chosen, and then just be like, oh, whoop, there goes. I mean, you could get there, but like you'd have to set it up first. So, I do think, to your point, there's a lot of play with this, especially 4 hexes. When we've seen this effect in first edition, I think it was always 3. And like it doesn't feel like a big difference, but one more hex for that, like that measuring distance actually makes a pretty big difference of how far you can reach. So yeah, really cool one. Always love strange positioning stuff. This will definitely catch people off guard because they will not expect you to suddenly have that fighter who is way in the back or way in the front suddenly not in danger anymore.
Right. So a lot of interesting stuff here, and not all of them are like raw power, right? Like,
no, not at all.
And
it feels very toolboxy to me.
Yeah, I agree. What do you feel about the upgrades?
Yeah, so there's quite a few that are like just kind of like it's a thing. It's here. It's not anything crazy, but it does a thing. Just to quickly just call out, like Dark Horse is the one you can just make a fighter tempered.
Mm-hmm.
So
is that 1 glory?
It is a 1 glory, yes.
Okay.
So you don't get it for free, which I think is a smart choice. Because being able to make a big fighter tempered too easily, I think, could be a problem. And then Deadly Aim, which is another 1 glory, but it just says your weapons have ensnare, which is nice if you have ranged attacks that you want to have ensnare. So I believe I don't remember what it's called, but the one that gives cleave, I think, is just for melee.
Sharpen points.
Yeah, sharpen points.
Reprinted in this deck from I think the other place we see it is. I was gonna say
no, it just says weapons. So yeah, I guess it applies to range as well. So I mean, and you get both in this deck, which is nice. Sometimes you want both options. Usually you just want cleave, but again, that's a meta read. You kind of have to know, like, am I going up against a lot of 2 dodge?
Yeah.
But in terms of some like actually just like, oh, that's different, that's interesting kind of cards. I think you'll probably want that one, so I'm gonna leave that one. But there's this one called Pesky Nuisance. This is a 2 glory upgrade. Enemy fighters adjacent to this fighter must target this fighter with any attacks. If you have a way, so I think the best way to think about this one is similar to the Fury of Akshi from Reckless Fury, where it was like, oh, if you're adjacent to this fighter, you can only take charge actions, which is obviously much more crippling than this. But I think the play pattern is similar, where you would like try to line this up on a fighter who's already charged.
Sure.
And then the only way they can attack is by attacking you with whatever fighter you put this on. And you probably made sure it was one that either you don't care if they attack or you would like
very
for
hard
them to attack.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much I like 2 glory on it though. What do you think?
I think that makes it a tougher tougher ask, but I will say I think with control tools, if you undervalue them, then maybe it's
Yeah,
a
it
little
can
too
get out
easy.
of
So
control. Yeah.
yeah,
I see that too. It's like, we kind of have to balance it just in case, right?
yeah,
it may not always be worth having to spend 2 glory for it, but on the times where it is, it's probably going to feel really horrible. So,
yeah.
all right.
I'll go with another one that is worth 2 glory, and this one definitely should be worth 2 glory.
Yeah.
And it is mobbed. When this fighter attacks, if the target is within 3 hexes of any other friendly fighters, the target is flanked and surrounded for that attack.
Oh
Yowza.
my god.
That is wild accuracy.
Yeah.
That turns a 2 sword attack into like a 2 hammer and flanked. Like that is, you're gonna get successes on your dice rolls here.
Almost certainly. There are so many fighters where this would be absolutely terrifying on.
Yeah.
As we've sort of already mentioned, Gristlewell suddenly hitting on everything but hammers feels pretty great.
Yeah.
Or I guess if you're playing one of the warbands like Kanan's, where you have a lot of tempered fighters and then you're one big beater, Kanan with mobbed is pretty scary. Because he's basically never gonna miss after he's got this on, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So there's a lot of play with this one. I think, yeah, this is probably the strongest upgrade.
I think that's probably true
in the deck.
Yeah,
but it's good, and it is like, it's not strong in a way that's oppressive, but it is just very good. So I like it.
Yep, agreed. What about you?
Yeah, well, another one that is, I think, on theme for the deck and pretty interesting is called Parting Shot. This one's 1 glory. It gives a reaction, Pyrrhic Strike. It says, immediately after this fighter is slain by an enemy fighter, before removing them from the battlefield, pick an enemy fighter within 2 hexes of them. Give that fighter a stagger token. If this fighter was tempered before inflicting the damage that would slay them, inflict 1 damage on that fighter.
Yeah.
This is sort of one of those deterrent upgrades. You sort of throw it out where it's like, hey, if you really want to kill this fighter, you're going to have to pay for it.
Yeah.
And more often than not, that's going to mean you get staggered and take a damage on the fighter who just came in to attack you. So,
yeah. And more I'm finding that 1 damage can be like a really big difference in this, like in first edition, it was like, oh, that 1 damage is like the difference between like killing a fighter, like you finish off a fighter with that ping or whatever.
Yeah.
Here it more feels like I have now brought you within the ability to kill you, either because maybe you were 5 health and I did a 2 damage hit to you. Now you have 3 damage on you, and now I can finish you off with another 2 damage hit or something. Like it just kind of inches you that little bit closer, where now they have to worry about lethal damage coming in on that fighter.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I totally agree. The math, and I still haven't quite gotten over this yet for second edition, is like the math on getting kills is way different than in first edition. And you really are going to need to have multiple damage sources for most things, unless you're fighting a swarm warband. So having this as an option to soften somebody up and sort of punish them for having decided to kill your key little fighter is probably a pretty good deterrent. I do like the design space in that it is limited to being slain by an enemy fighter. So you can't trigger this by getting killed with a ping.
Yeah.
And then because of the range of only 2 hexes, if they are a ranged warband, they could theoretically get the kill in a situation where they're not going to get affected. So
totally
can play around it, but it is asking something of you to do so. So it has value as well.
Let's see. I guess I will say there's a weapon in here, and on the one hand I was like, oh, right, like this is great because this is fueled by pain. No. Very close to driven by pain. But I was like, Yeah, having a weapon in a warband or in this deck as it's going to be attached to warbands that are more likely to need weapons is not a good weapon.
No, it is really,
Um,
really bad. I'm not actually
yeah,
sure what the purpose of this is.
yeah. It's range one, hits on hammers with X number of dice, where X is equal to the number of damage tokens this fighter has, and it has like crit, gets you, and snare. I think most of the fighters that could really turn this into something impressive because they can take a lot of wounds already have an attack that is essentially as good as this most of the time.
Yeah.
So um, that's a little bit of a bummer. But I think that the one I wanted to, I guess I totally called that one out already, but the one I really want to pay attention to is Lash Out.
Yeah.
And this is with the surge reaction. It's not reaction, it's the surge ability, I guess, of Thrash.
Yeah.
Immediately after this fighter is slain, before removing them from the battlefield, roll a number of save dice equal to the battle round. For each shield, give an enemy fighter within 2 hexes of this fighter a move token.
Oh my
So
god.
same sort of thing, like another kind of control element. And I think you often end up with that situation where, hey, I had to put a fighter deep into enemy territory. Maybe I'm scoring like one of the Emberstone Sentinel cards, like Slow Advance or Iron Grip, where I'm trying to hold everything in enemy, or even one of the ones from this. And then that fighter is sitting in a dangerous spot. Well, you give this to them at the end of that battle round ahead of time. And like, okay, you got the first action step, enemy. If you want to do it, you got a good chance of having that fighter kind of locked down. So
Yeah. And the fact that it is for each shield. So
yeah,
in theory, you could get really lucky and then put 3 move tokens out. Like, oh boy.
yeah,
Um, and notably, this one does say just when they are slain. So there would be a way for you to do this where you trigger it yourself.
that's true.
And it could be on a fighter like Tick Tick,
Yeah.
where
He's
already blowing himself up anyway.
Oh no, he blows himself up and he hands out move tokens.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's I think
Yeah.
that's a good one. It like it's better later in the game, but even if you get lucky early, it could be pretty useful. So some very cool stuff in this deck. Lots of very different sort of stuff. I think that is probably going to be sort of the defining feature of this deck, in my opinion. I don't know what your thoughts have been.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's pretty spot on. I'm interested to see, because there's like, if you're trying to, we talked about like the kind of obvious pairings, but I'm interested to see if somebody finds a way to like, hey, I think there's enough here that it's going to be like my secondary, like my kind of salt in deck or something like that. So.
Yeah, maybe just take it for some of the control pieces and sort of ignore some of the tempered stuff. Maybe.
Yeah. I don't know.
Could be interesting.
Yeah. Let's hit Borgitz Beastgrabbaz.
Yeah, I hope that's how you say it. I really. It looks like Borgit, and I figure it must be Git because it's GIT, which is always a Git in the Warhammer universe. So, yeah, what's going on with these guys?
Well, we'll start that it is led by Borgit Wolfkilla, who fancies himself a hunter. His mate Snags and Hoblin Drag eagerly employ snotling lures and poisons, little realizing that the Grot boss uses them as bait. Borgit's trump card is Uglug the Troggoth, who he dreams of growing to massive size, though the Grot's spiteful tendency to keep him in cramped spaces has the opposite effect.
Yeah.
With Rig and Sham to lead Uglug by pretending to be his pet squig, Borgit moves on Embergard. He seeks signs of the huge Troggoth Trug and hunts anything fleeing the Skaven invasion. We've talked about it before. It's a visually pretty hilarious warband.
Yeah.
I almost had the intro for this was under 30 Grotz in a trench coat.
That would have been appropriate.
Yeah. But we they're cool. Do you want to, what makes sense to you? Do you think the War Scroll or the fighter cards first here?
I like to know what the different abilities for the warband are before I look at the fighters, because it gives context to their stats.
Sure. I think that
Some,
makes sense.
yeah, that's just my preference. But so I
Um,
guess easy place to start for every warband is how do they inspire?
yeah. This is
Um,
real simple, very controllable. After friendly fighter delves, inspire that fighter. And important to note that it doesn't have to delve a treasure to a feature or a feature to a treasure. It's just delve.
yeah.
Um,
So in theory, once every power step, you could be inspiring a fighter.
yeah. It's a little more complicated than that because it's putting you in particular positions, and
Yep.
then also the available features are going to kind of fill up. So you got to decide who's going to take your 2 or 3 inspires in the first round, depending on who can get to what, and also are those spots that are helpful to get to or not. But um, I think right out of the gate that gives us an indicator that you get to decide who's going to inspire
Absolutely.
fairly early. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially in round one, you can just sort of decide that, like, hey, there's a couple of fighters I want inspired, and you can just make
Mhm.
it happen.
Yeah.
Not a lot of warbands can say that. So that is
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah. Next up is the next ability, and this is over on the left hand side of their card, is Trophy Hunters. You want to run that one down for us?
Absolutely. So this says at the start of your first action step in the first battle round, pick an enemy fighter with a health characteristic of 3 or more to be the trophy. And it specifically says the trophy. Melee attacks that target the trophy have +1 attack dice.
Yeah.
So there's a few things to break down here, but
Mhm.
go ahead.
So what's funny about this is that if somehow we entered a meta where everyone's like, "Oh yeah, I'm going tempered all the way," then you may not have a lot of options on here.
Yeah, right.
Um, but this will be something to keep in mind when we are looking at the attack action profiles for these fighters. It's going to say there's somebody on the other side that you're going to have for everybody except Dreg, who's sporting a ranged attack. People are going to have 1 extra dice on that particular target, which is important to keep in mind. And I like the head game. It says like, hey, I am going to pick the fighter that, you might pick one that's worth a lot of bounty, so you can get that big bounty payoff, or you may pick the one that you don't want to have to tangle with. You be like, hey, if you want to push, I don't know, whatever particular fighter forward, we're going to get rid of that dude. Like if you're going against Zarbag's Gitz or something, like you might be like, hey, I really don't want Stirk to get up in my face, or I really need the help. Like Snurk's going to be a real problem for me, so maybe I'm going to make it easier to kill Snurk or something like that. So
Yeah. I love that this is chosen at the start of your first action step. So if you're going second, you even get to see your opponent's whole first turn before you get to choose this.
yeah,
And I feel like it really puts a lot of pressure on your opponent as to where do they want to put their 3+ health fighters during deployment, because it could be the situation where they're like, okay, well, I assume they're going to be put it on my leader. And I really need my leader to be alive for some of the stuff in my deck. So therefore I can't really play with them forward because it's just going to be too easy to get hit.
right.
So therefore I have to deploy back. But then you, knowing that they would think that, might actually be like, well, actually I was going to pick somebody else, but I purposely just wanted your leader out of the way. So now they've been deployed in the back and I can get to this other fighter. And like, it's a lot of weird stuff that's like going to make your opponent have to decide,
sure,
how do they want to put their fighters on the board. And that's always tough. It's something people don't even always think about. So I think if you feel like you can manipulate your opponent with this, you can probably get a lot of play out of it. It also just says melee attacks. It doesn't have to be something printed on their card. So like if you have weapon upgrades that are particularly cool, you can get an extra attack dice with those too.
Yeah, that's a great point. The next one is debate, and this is a surge immediately after a friendly minion, and minion's going to be everybody except the leader and the troll. Immediately after a friendly minion is slain, push your leader a number of hexes equal to the health characteristic of the slain minion. That push must end adjacent to an enemy fighter, not necessarily the enemy fighter that did the slaying. And it didn't even have to be a enemy fighter slew the the minion. Could have been a ping, or could have even been you yourself, I
Yeah,
guess. If you're
yeah.
feeling
You
really
can
callous.
really set this stuff up however you want.
Yeah. We'll look. I mean, I think this is one that we got to keep in mind when we look at Borgitz fighter card,
Yes,
because this is basically saying like, hey, Borgit might be on the hook for doing a lot of the work for your warband, and so the question is Borgit up to the task?
absolutely. I think one of the other things, at least that to me is sort of an immediate push and pull with this ability, is that since you have to end adjacent when you use this, you really have to think. Like, it's not always going to be an immediate, like, oh, you killed a minion, well, therefore I'm going to push, because it may be dangerous to do that. It may be
Right.
that you've already charged. It may be that like the only fighter within reach is somebody you really don't want to be moving towards. Like, it might actually be moving you away from what you really want. So like,
Sure.
this I think will be a very situational ability, but also a very strong one. I mean, being able to push little spoiler, up to 3 hexes
Yeah.
is a lot. That's basically a
Yeah.
free move. So
Right. And I see it also if you choose to go a route with this warband that cares about being on treasure or features, this is almost like an insurance policy too. Like, hey, I've got
oh sure, yeah.
one of my minions on this. You kill them without overrunning onto it. Well, now I'm going to react and move right back onto it, or I'll push right back
Yeah.
onto it and maybe even be able to attack you.
Could be pretty
Yeah.
fun that way. So
Yeah.
very fun ability, very interesting. Not like 100% you will always use this, but has a lot. I mean, push is always good. So
Yep. Concur.
big pushes.
Yeah.
Their first activated ability on their war scroll is called Giddish Tactics. So this is use this immediately after a friendly Uglug or friendly Borgitz successful attack. Until the end of the battle round, the target of that attack is Muggins. Friendly minions, melee weapons, have Grievous or Crit Grievous when targeting Muggins. You can only use the Giddish Tactics ability once per game. So this is a weird one for me.
Yeah, I agree.
So Crit Grievous is good, just inherently. But since you have to have made a successful attack with one of your heavy hitting fighters, there's not always going to be a need to have extra damage for like the follow up.
Right.
Even against like a 5 health fighter, this might just be overkill. So it's a little odd in how you can trigger it. Like if there was a thing that was just like, oh, just for the next activation, your minions can have Crit Grievous to use this once per game, it'd be like, oh, okay, so you can like have a temporary damage boost that you get to choose when it happens. But this is just kind of awkward. So I'm not 100% sure when you need this, but I guess you'll know when you do, and you'll try to make the most of it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes in biggest on 5 wound fighters, right? Because
yeah,
I mean, there's that in between, right? So like I think there's a few, but also because it's crit Grievous, not just straight Grievous. It's not hyper powerful, but it will maybe get in your opponent's head a little bit of like pushing where the kill thresholds are.
Yeah. And I guess if your opponent's running a warband with a 6 or plus health fighter, then yeah, any extra damage is always appreciated. So
yep.
Not bad. And I guess it is fair to point out Crit Grievous is easier when you're getting +1 dice from the trophies. So
right,
that is
exactly.
also something.
Yeah. The next one is Reassuring Presence. This is a surge. Use this immediately after your action step. If a friendly Uglug used any core abilities in that step, you can push each friendly minion up to 3 hexes. Each fighter pushed in this way must end that push adjacent to a friendly Uglug. You can only use this ability once per game. That's a lot of pushing.
Oh man, so much.
It's well designed in my thought process because it says that, hey, Uglug has to have done something. Mm-hmm. So you can't, this isn't like a immediate yo-yo where I charged, let's say, I think Snags is maybe your best minion for laying damage out. I charged Snags into a dangerous spot I can't immediately pull snags back into safety.
Yeah.
I have to take an opportunity. I have to last long enough to have Uglug do something to pull him back.
Absolutely. Um, and the adjacency requirement is also quite the limitation. If you're trying to push 3 fighters and they all have to end adjacent to a single fighter, that ends up taking up half of the available adjacent hexes, and it just may not be possible in 3 hexes to even do that. So like, yes, you can push all these fighters, but you may not actually be able to do that. So nice little limiter there. To be fair, when I first read this, the immediate thing that came to my mind is a few things that you would do to me a lot in season 1 would be like, okay, I've got to set up all these fighters, and I know that I'm playing like a less aggressive strategy. So the first thing I'm going to do with this fighter that's, because of where the deployment hexes are, you had to be further forward. It's like, well, I'm just going to move them backwards rather than like draw a power card or something. It's like, I'm just going to move away.
Yeah.
Because I don't really want you to have easy charges. Yeah. Well, this is kind of that on steroids in that you could have like the whole front line of your warband, the first activation of the game, just pull back like 3 hexes. And it's just like, oh no, now you have no charges in the whole first round. I mean, you're ceding a lot of territory by doing that. But if you think it's important, like you could really mess with somebody. And I guess conversely, you could do the same thing where you could like have all the minions deployed further back and then immediately pull them all up by like going on guard or something as your first activation.
I think exactly. I also think I see this often. Well, not often. I see this as an opportunity to kind of load over onto one flank. Like I've seen that happen in a number of Underworlds games where like you can isolate a fighter for an activation or two, an action step or two by, hey, maybe I'm a little bit to the left, and now Uglug drags people even further to the left side, and now maybe Gorhulk who was over going to try and thrash some Grotz on that side is now actually out of charge range or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, right. I think that's a really good point, especially against those elite warbands where like taking them out of the fight even for 1 round is a big loss of action economy. So lots of cool plays with this. I like that it's just any core ability, so you can trigger this a number of different ways. I think it's very good that it's only once per game. It'd be really strong if it was like once per action round or something.
Oof, yeah,
that'd be too much, but should be fun. I think this is probably their strongest ability.
I think that is probably true. What's the next one?
The next and last ability on their War Scroll is called Stab 'em Good. You use this immediately after your action step if a friendly minion used any core abilities in that step. Until the end of the next action step, the first time after an enemy fighter is pushed, placed, or enters any hex adjacent to a friendly minion, inflict 1 damage on that fighter. You can only use this ability once per game. So you essentially get the spin-in effect, but on all of your minions for 1 turn. Which is pretty good, right?
Yeah, I mean, available for any one of them. Oh, to a friendly minion. Doesn't have to be that same friendly minion that did something.
No, it's just all your minions get this little bubble. And then anytime in the next activation, the first time that somebody gets adjacent, they will get a damage. So,
and it's even a little more broad than that until the end of the next action step. So if you had some ability to push or something like that, they can get damage in the power step depending on what shenanigans happen there.
Yeah, so I suppose there's the play of like, okay, I move up with snags or something. I attack for a 2 damage, which we'll get to stats, but make it this 2 damage attack. There were 3, health fighter or whatever, and then you're like, okay, now I play this push
battle or whatever,
and then you essentially sort of design yourself a ping. So I think it's a pretty strong ability. Certainly makes your opponent have to think. If it's like, if you're in the situation where you are assuming, okay, they were gonna charge me, at least I can make sure I put a damage on them when they do it.
Sure. Yeah. I think this is part of that. Between this and, to a much lesser extent, the Giddish tactics is a way to sort of slowly engineer. Hey, I'm going to find enough different sources of damage to take down some fighters that look like they were out of reach.
Yeah, yeah, and make the objectively like bad fighters uh, have a use beyond their like very small attacks.
Right.
All right. Well, that is all their abilities. I think that frames a good context for the actual fighters themselves. So,
Sure.
how about the leader, Borgit?
Yeah, he starts out uninspired with move 3, defense of 2 shield, which is wow.
Yeah. Holy moly.
3 health and 2 bounty. And that's pretty reasonable there. I think the 3 health is a little scary since you are theoretically with debate using this fella a fair amount.
Yeah, I would assume so.
But his attack profile is pretty solid to start. That's a range 1, hit 2 hammers, 2 damage with crit grievous, and when you include the possibility of trophy hunters in there, he's got access to 3 damage right out of the gate if he can get those crits. And that's even easier on whoever you've targeted. Inspiring picks him up a point of movement and extra dice, which is very welcome when you are still sporting that crit grievous.
Yeah. I mean, it's not much more you could ask for a Grot, right? I mean, he is pulling his weight. Having access to 3 damage right out of the gate is pretty scary. And getting through 2 block, unless your opponent has cleave, that is going to be a tough ask, I think.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth mentioning this warband is likely going to be in cover at least some of the time because they're going to be delving to inspire.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So like if you're thinking, well, the first time you engage with Borgit might be he's in a cover hex with 2 block and admittedly staggered. Like,
sure,
it's still, that's quite a bit to try and get through. So
it's enough to be a discouraging target to attack. You know, sometimes I look at those and I'm like, I don't know if I want to waste an entire action step, you know, taking a swing into something that is that unlikely to pay off. You know?
Right.
Especially if you can build some extra, you know, penalties in for doing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Things like immovable or whatever it is. No, unassailable is what I'm thinking of out of Emberstone. Or like, hey, I'm on a treasure. You swing at me and you miss, I'm getting glory, sort of thing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I like him. I think he's good. I think it's good that he has 3 health instead of 4. 4 with 2 block would be pretty crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I do think you'll probably be trying to put something like Great Fortitude on him just to get him up to that 4 threshold.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, very solid. I think to your point about like having that ability to push him around on offense, he's certainly very scary. I don't know that I'd be super happy about him just bouncing in after I took out one of the minions.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is scary with only the 3 health. So
yeah. You want us to run down the cutest little trog in the game?
Yeah, very very cute little trog here. Such an like we haven't said a whole lot about the sculpts, but like such a very interesting sculpt that he's like this tiny little trog and he's got this basket of snotlings on his back because they apparently need all those snotlings to use as bait, which is kind of horrifying. But and you can kind of see there's like some of them trying to like escape the basket and stuff, so they know what's going on. And then the greatest thing is that like he's set up to be sneaky because of course the troll is sneaky, and he's got this little like I don't even know what you'd call it necessarily, but it's basically like a wolf costume, but it's like got this wood frame that he's like holding like an umbrella over his head. And he's like, yep, I'm just a wolf.
No one here but us wolves.
Which makes me think that Borgit probably rides around on his head because it's trying to be like the wolf riding Grotz.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just a troll. But he is uninspired. a 3 move, 1 block, 5 health, 2 bounty troll, which you might expect 3, but no, he is 2. And his attack profile is very scary. He has range 2, 2 hammers, 2 damage, cleave right out the gate.
Oof.
That range 2 for the melee attack makes me really nervous about this guy because that's a pretty scary thing. Really, the only other fighters we see start kind of similarly are the other really big guys like Mollog, Kanan, Black Powder.
Yeah, and even a lot of like leaders here. I'm thinking of Vasilak. Start. Yeah, they got a range 2 attack, but it only does 1 damage.
Yeah,
like that.
So,
this is premium.
This is very much so, and like you would usually expect, like, oh well, if you're gonna have something like this, that's gonna be sort of your only heavy hitter. But we just discussed Borgitz can actually do quite a bit of damage. So, you really have 2 pretty good fighters here. And when he inspires, he gains a point of defense and he picks up Grievous. So, yikes.
So he'll have his choice of Grievous or Cleave when he's swinging that range 2.
Yep.
Usually 2 hammers, but maybe 3 if he's swinging at the trophy.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're 3 hammers, 3 damage at range 2, that is no joke. You got to be scared. I am imagining you probably try and inspire Uglug as soon as possible because he is going to be priority target number 1, I would imagine. Yeah. So getting him that extra block is a big deal.
Yeah, to the extent that depending on the game state, I'd be willing to use something like a confusion or a sidestep to get him onto something to delve it so that he can activate there. But I think the ideal situation is you have a feature that you can charge onto, swing with your range 2 attack, delve yourself into cover and 2 block for defense.
That would certainly be the ideal.
Yeah. So playing against that, you got to really think about where the features are going down and where your fighters are going, because you kind of don't want to give up that ideal inspire with a swing as well sort of situation.
Absolutely. I'm not looking forward to playing against this troll. I think it's going to be really gross, but not something insurmountable by any means. Like we've seen other big scary fighters that you can still get them. Yeah. So
I think he and Borgitz are going to drive up stocks on shields.
Not
shields. Drive up stocks on Cleave. I was going to say.
Yeah, I was sort of tracking where you were going with that. Yeah. Like you really are going to need it because with 2 defense dice, it's suddenly pretty scary. How about the pet troll here? Or not pet troll, the pet squig for the troll.
Yeah, no Grotz here, just pet squigs. So Rig and Sham are one of the ones that their job is to poison the targets, and this is represented by the fact that their attack action has stagger on it. Yep. They're move 3. Impressively 2 dodge right out of the gate, 3 health and 1 bounty. The attack profile is nothing to write home about. Range 1, 2 swords, 1 damage, but with stagger. Really the ideal situation for them is that they're poisoning, i.e. staggering the trophy.
Yeah.
But they can also kind of, again, they're bait. So you set them somewhere and be like, yeah, if you want to try and hit this 2 dodge fighter that is maybe in cover, go for it. But Borgit's going to come pounce on you afterwards. So
Yep. He's lying in wait. He's using these Grotz as bait. So
yeah. On Inspire, they get an extra point of move and an extra dice on their attack profile.
I think that extra dice is very welcome for a fighter whose intention is to set up other fighters' attacks with stagger. You really have to be able to hit.
Yeah. And also if Giddish tactics are in play, right? So
yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Want another possible crack at that Grievous crit.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well,
Snags is the next guy, and I think he's a more useful fighter in general than our previous Rig and Sham.
Yeah, I would say premium minion, right? It's like the best of the bad. So he's 3 move, 2 dodge, 2 health, 1 bounty to start. But he has this weird little catching stick. Range 2 hammers for 1 damage, but it has grapple. Pretty rare ability. We haven't seen used a lot. What this one is for folks who don't remember, the ability where you get to change your drive back into a push instead.
Yeah.
Pretty neat thing to be able to do. You could like pull somebody closer to the troll. You could set somebody up so that they're like just in a bad spot. I suppose this is also an ability where if you really no, that won't work. I was thinking, oh, you could set up stab 'em good and use stab 'em good, but that would actually trigger too late because
Right.
you would have done the grappling before the trigger for the ability. So
Yeah.
And when he inspires, he picks up move, which is pretty common, but he also gets an extra damage. So then he's range 2 hammers for 2 damage. So like pretty solid, honestly, for a little 2 health guy.
Yeah. I think it makes him another one you're interested in inspiring, just to like, if I think I'm going to need a backup attack, then this one is pretty handy. And if you happen to have great strength or something, then all of a sudden you're really talking about a pretty sweet attack.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is yet another very interesting model. If you haven't gone and looked at all these models, go check all of them out because they are. This is like top gits. Like it doesn't get too much more gittish than this.
Yeah. Dreg is the final fighter, also a minion. 3 move, 2 dodge, 2 health, 1 bounty. This one is your other poisoner, so stagger on his attack, and his attack is a range 3, 2 swords, 1 damage, and then inspire gets an extra move and an extra dice. I was kind of cold on this guy. I'm like, I don't know why this guy's in here, but he actually makes a great bait, right? Like you lob him forward. If you manage to stagger somebody, all the better, and then he's there as bait to kind of counterpunch with Borgit. So I think it's nice. He can get onto a feature, maybe advance a game plan a little bit, take a low risk attack. And so not as bad. And then only the 1 bounty. I think this one lines up pretty nicely.
Yeah, I really love range 3 attacks that have the stagger ability. Being able to set up future attacks from a safe spot and potentially from a position where you can make multiple attacks in a round.
Yeah.
Something I'm personally like quite a bit. I actually think Dreg is probably better than Rig and Sham just because of the range being there. So personally, I think I like them as sort of like an opener in a lot of situations. You could go and get them inspired, assuming that you need to delve for scoring. You probably are just doing that right away with these guys because there's no real harm in somebody coming to get them after you've charged them.
Yeah.
And if they decide they don't want to charge you, then you can have them just hang out and be ready to start shooting little poison arrows and be annoying the rest of the game.
Yeah. And that covers the fighters. So I think there's the War Scroll as a whole has some cool things, but no, some War Scrolls you look at and you're like, like everybody looked at Enrage is like, wow, that's crazy powerful.
Yeah.
None of these like reach out and slap you in the face and say, I can't believe how amazing this particular ability is.
Yeah.
And that I actually kind of like that. Like this is, it'll be cool to see if you can, how much of this extra pushing and all that you can leverage to make some cool plays in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the combination of all these different things kind of all going on, I think adds up to a pretty nice War Scroll. But I think you're right. Like there's no one of these things where you're like, ooh, man, I really got to worry about that. Like maybe maybe Trophy Hunt is going to be the one that is the most concerning, because it's just a flat accuracy boost for the whole game. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, I like it. It's like a nice balanced war scroll. The warband is doing kind of a bunch of different things. Very controllable Inspire. Yeah, a neat warband, a very different take on Grotz from anything we've seen yet, and we've had a number of
Yeah.
them.
What do you think makes for good pairings with this warband as far as decks?
Well, I think that their Inspire kind of steers you very hard right into Pillage and Plunder, right? Because it's like, well, I'm gonna be delving anyway, so I guess I might as well get some glory for it.
Yeah. And even the pushes help there as well.
Yeah,
you know, like
absolutely.
Charging with Uglug into a particular spot and then using that as an excuse to push a Git onto a feature that you didn't want to quite stand on with Uglug, but now you got, you know, like, yeah, I think there's a lot. I think if you are doing just a straight Rivals, this is probably the first place you stop. And then
I mean, it sort of screams at you that, like, just do it. Just do it, dummy. Yeah. But I think beyond, you know, so Pillage and Plunder is a weird deck, right? Like it kind of asks a lot of you, but it is good, and it's good in the sense that it's hard to stop some of the scoring. Because it's like, oh, well, if you delved an odd treasure token, you're gonna score that one end phase. I don't remember what it's called, but it's like, oh, it's happened. It's already done. I can't do anything about it anymore. So it's like there's some play there where it can be kind of passive, which is nice for these warbands with some fighters that aren't always super great at fighting. It doesn't necessarily ask you to always be in position to delve. It's like, I need to delve, but once I've done it, I can then be out of that position and it doesn't hurt me like holding does.
It carries a couple extra weapons in there. Burrowing Strike comes to mind. Excavating Blast, I think, is the other one. But Burrowing Strike, I think, would be welcome to be thrown on your two Poisoners, especially.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, you definitely have a lot of play there, I think. The other options, then, it sort of depends. What do you think these guys do best? Personally, I think you don't really want to be aggro. The warband is advertised as being flex, which makes sense. But with only two really effective combatants, I think you really do have to be like fighting from your, hills, as, just quote the Art of War sort of idea, that it's like you really need to be fighting advantageous fights and otherwise probably avoiding combat altogether. So I don't really know where that puts me. I'm thinking you probably stay away from the strike decks unless there's like a very specific card that you're like, I need this. I don't know. What are you thinking so far?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that Edge of the Knife helps them too much. They've only got two fighters who are tempered out of the gate, so I'm not sure that I would go in there right away.
Yeah.
But we talked about that Staggerers. I think Countdown to Cataclysm gives you some passive scores. So
sure does.
For running up the Cataclysm count, Wreckers, there's some stuff you can score that will allow you to score without having to like push hard into enemy territory, and it has weapons in it.
Yes, so one of the best, in fact. So
yeah, exactly. So I think I might be looking at a Pillage countdown thing as like a first attempted pairing.
Well, but Skylar would be happy to hear it.
But super open to other options too,
Yeah, for sure. The other thing that I've been trying to like wrap my head around is they feel a little bit like a control warband. Maybe not at first blush, but it's like, well, you got these push things, and you got this like weird choices about, how do you want to deal with stab 'em good with the ping stuff? How do you want to deal with debate?
Yeah,
and like if you really are leaning into the control side of things, then Rack and Ruin does sort of work.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little anti-synergistic in that Rack and Ruin has a lot of stuff that's like Alone in the Dark, where you don't want anybody adjacent, but you've got this ability that immediately says push fighters adjacent.
Yeah.
Actually, two. So it's like, oh, I don't know if that necessarily works, but there might be something there.
Yeah.
In the power deck, at least, that you can leverage. Um, and like pings would not go amiss for these guys. Yes, you have two fighters that can hit 3 damage, but your minions really don't contribute. So maybe pings are the way to get that extra damage.
Yeah.
But I do think hold would be hard for these guys. Can we agree on that?
I think it could be. Yeah.
So you probably stay away from Emberstone Sentinels.
Yeah, I'd have to think about that. I mean, you could
Although,
do it with Uglug and if you can manage that. I mean, like being able to threaten a big score off of a supremacy with one of your main guys plus one of your minions holding something towards the
hold
back.
them back. I guess the other sort of awkward part is that if you are assuming that your one half is pillage and plunder, hold can become awkward in that you now have to like time the flips.
Yeah,
and
right. I've definitely played against people who are doing that pairing, and then they'll be like, "I'm going to delve." Wait, no, I'm not yet. Hold on, no.
Let me
no,
think
actually,
about this.
I am. No, wait, not yet.
Yeah,
Oh man, and they get to the end, and like, no, I still messed it up.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I played myself.
Yeah.
So that is definitely always something to consider. I think that if you want to combine a hold strategy with pillage, you really have to sort of choose your lane and like say, I'm going to really lean one way or the other, and then salt in a little bit of
the other.
The other.
Sure.
So it's tougher. Admittedly, the power cards in Emberstone are some of the best. So
they are pretty hot fire.
Do not dislike those options. But
Right.
I think I'm probably leaning something like you said, Cataclysm feels like a strong choice, and then maybe something like Rack. And if you think you have enough objective play just from Pillage and Plunder, maybe you could even make Edge work as like just taking it for the power cards to have the control pieces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's where I'd probably lean, kind of that passive scoring style with a lot of flexible options. You can kind of decide, am I the beatdown? Do I need to stay away from my opponent? And then do some like cute things like I'm going to have Rig and Sham go jump on this token and I'm going to flip it. And then I don't care what you do after that because I've got my glory and that's all I needed.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes for some interesting things. We're having to record this a little bit earlier than we might have otherwise, so we haven't gotten to get the reps. So only just a lot of theory crafting at this point. But
absolutely,
I would hope that when we come at you again with another rep, we'll be able to talk to you about some of those.
Yeah, maybe we could. We haven't done a bat rep in quite a while. Maybe we can figure something out where we.
That is true. We've had a few requests. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's good. You got any more things you want to say about the deck, Edge of the Knife, or Borgitz?
I would just say I think everybody needs to try not to like judge Edge of the Knife before playing it. I just came away from so many cards in that deck thinking like, this might not be very good on paper. And then my immediate reaction then after thinking that is like, I've thought that a lot so far in second.
I know.
And I've been wrong a lot. So I think I need to reserve judgment until I have a chance to actually like sleeve this thing up and give it a whirl.
I think that's fair.
I have to imagine that between the control elements of the power deck and then some of the sort of just passive scoring that you can have in here, like there's got to be something you can make something work here. I guess the only caveat is that this is our second plot card, which means for the Nemesis format, you just need to be cognizant of the fact that this can never be paired with Cataclysm. So those two do not go together. And that
I forgot that is a blanket rule
because plot cards, you can only have one. So, that will be something of a restriction and may make it harder for people to reach for this one. So, Just another thing that we didn't call out earlier, that the plot restriction is in effect.
Is Countdown our only other plot card right now?
It is.
Okay.
So
interesting.
Yeah,
All right.
those become your choices.
Okay.
If you're looking at plots.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Well, all right. I think that's going to do it for us as far as covering these things. I think it's a couple of real solid releases. I'm most excited to see if Edge of the Knife gives enough of a boost to those warbands we talked about, those kind of horde warbands who, it's not that we didn't see them at Worlds. Obviously, like the story of that was how elite aggro was, but like with Reckless tanks taking such a huge hit. And then, there were people who were doing interesting things with Spike Claws and with Gits and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see if like this little nudge gets them that little bit of extra that they all of a sudden they're another. And I love the possibility of that having entered the conversation.
I'm certainly looking forward to it.
Yeah, I would love to hear from listeners what you think you would like to pair with, or what your first ideas for experimenting with are. So let us know. You can do that at whatthehexcast@gmail.com, or you can talk to us on our Discord, where we get some good chat going. You can check out our other content at themortalrealms.com. Thanks to them for having us as part of the network. We will be talking more about the Mortal Realms Con coming up in September. We should also say thanks to GW for the preview content, making this possible so that we can have this out to you on the day of release, and you can have something to kind of feed your hype as you put this stuff on pre-order.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Coming up, we are going to figure it out, but I think, one of our most divisive topics is the audio bat reps. Some people love them, some people hate them. We've had some specific requests, so we will. I think I'd like to have us do some sort of deck building or a bat rep, and we'll see how that goes.
Maybe we can. We have all the equipment now. Maybe we can start to figure out video bat reps.
Yeah,
throw some folks a bone.
That's Skylar's hope is that he can make that happen, and I hope we can too.
Yeah.
But Phil, you know what time it is.
Oh, I shouldn't say prepared, but I will be willing to take this quiz.
I'm gonna give you the hint that you don't need, and that is that it is a card from Edge of the Knife. So
okay, I figured.
You're welcome.
I figured.
This is not attributed, but it is about somebody obvious. So Uglug didn't think much about the slings and arrows hurled against him, or the rocks that rained down from the crumbling ceiling. Uglug, in fact, didn't think about much at all.
Oh boy. Man,
It is an upgrade.
Oh, okay. Well, I was thinking it might be like immovable.
That's a good call.
But that is an objective, so I was definitely not on the right track there. To be fair, I haven't memorized the names of enough of the cards in this deck to really have a good chance of getting this.
Yeah. This is a name you definitely know, because it's been printed several times.
So perhaps, it's a reprint. Oh, well, so it's probably Great Fortitude then.
You got it. There you go. Yeah.
Okay. Let me take a quick look here. What even are the names of all these? The only other one that would have probably made sense is Impervious, but I wouldn't have even been able to guess that, because no.
What I like is that you're like immovable was your first thought. That actually does have a troll on it. It's just Mollog is on it. So
yeah. That's right. That's right. I even mentioned that earlier in the when we were looking at the cards. Oh, anyway.
I will say the quote game on this deck is really strong. There's some great ones in here.
Oh man.
Particularly, yes. I love that Gikit is quoted on one of the objectives where it is power in numbers, and he's like, "Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough." And then you get all the way to the upgrades, and he's saying it again. He's, I said, "Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough." One at a time, though.
Please. Yeah. I think my favorite I guess maybe we shouldn't give away all of these, but I really like the sharpened points one.
Yeah. It kind of it tells you a little bit about this warband. Like reminds you what those snotlings are on there for.
Yeah, gives a little more flavor to the look on the snotling's face.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in honor of the tempered plot card there from Edge of the Knife, we're going to go with recommended listening of Sweet Disposition by The Temper Trap, which is a band I haven't thought about in quite a while, but happened across while I was trying to find something for this. So that'll do it for us. For What the Heck, I've been Davy.
And I've been Phil.